Hello, and welcome to what is lesson 7 of Inspector Calls. So, what we're going to talk about today is Mrs. Birling and her portrayal in the play and how that is important. What was Priestley trying to accomplish by presenting Mrs. Birling in the manner that he did? Okay, well, let's start off with the obvious about Mrs. Birling. We know that she has two children. One is named Sheila and the other is Eric. Now, one thing, this is very important. This is in the very opening scene where they're celebrating Sheila's engagement. Sheila uses this word called squiffy, something very squiffy. And right away, Mrs. Birling jumps on her. It's like, oh, I don't understand you young people today, your choice of words. She's criticizing her choice of words in the very, very beginning, treating her like a young child. Sheila is often referred to as the child. She's old enough to get married, yet she is being treated like somebody who's 7 or 8 years old. She's told when to go to bed, when it's time for dinner. And again, this very opening scene, when they're actually celebrating her engagement to Gerald, she's chiding her for using a word that she doesn't approve of. Now, if we go over to Eric, Eric is also an adult. We know that Eric likes to drink. And she's very critical of his drinking, even though he's perfectly old enough to do this. He's, got means. It's, I wouldn't say so, maybe not socially acceptable, but there's nothing wrong with him having a drink every now and again. And she's criticizing him for that. Now, when the inspector does arrive and, points out his drinking, I believe the line is something like, you enjoy a drink or something like that. She jumps right in and says, no, he's only just a boy. Again, using that phrase boy, meaning that no, he's not an adult, he's just a boy. So again, she does not see her children as adults reaching adulthood. She sees them as very young, needing to be looked after, and that's her purpose. Okay, now also, behavior was very important to people back then. Remember the importance of reputation. We talked about this in previous lessons with Sheila, especially, and especially for women. Reputation was everything. Now, Mrs. Birling wants her children to behave in a socially acceptable manner because she knows that that behavior is going to reflect upon her. So yes, she wants her children to be successful. She wants them to behave in certain ways, but not just for their benefit, also for her benefit, because what they do reflects upon her and her reputation. Now, that's her as a mother. We also know that Mrs. Birling sits on the board of charities. Now, she's married to Mr. Birling, obviously, who's a very successful businessman. So she carries some social influence in her circles. Now, she sits on the board of major charities of the time, but is she a charitable person? This is something that is rather ironic. A lot of people think, oh, she sits on all these charity boards. She must be a lovely person, must be caring, must care about the poor. Well, charities were often, I don't want to say, well, fronts in a way. Women were barred. We talked about this in previous lessons. Women were barred from many professions at this time. They couldn't work. They couldn't be doctors. They couldn't be lawyers. Maybe nurses, maybe domestic servants. But the jobs they were allowed to enter were often very low paid, very difficult for them to support themselves on their own, forcing them into marriage. We talked about this in previous lessons. Now, charity work, upper class women, obviously, and upper middle class women didn't have to worry so much about financial burdens of not working, but they needed something to fill up their day. Charities filled that void. So a lot of very wealthy women would do charity work, and it looked like they were caring for the poor. Now, it also was considered very acceptable work for a woman to do. Women were considered to be more caring, more nurturing, fulfilling that role of the caring mother. So charities were kind of an extension of that. So it was like, oh, well, that's a very socially and morally acceptable thing for women to do with their time, work for charities. Again, also filtering into their reputation. If they worked for a charity, they were considered a good and caring person, and that again furthered their good reputation in society. Now, this was a reflection of what was happening at the time. There was very, very little in the way of a social welfare system like we have today in England, almost non existent. Is Mrs. Birling a charitable person? We could say no. We'll go more into this in the next slide. Eva Smith comes to her and asks for help. And she is not only denied help, she's actually criticized and judged for being in the situation that she is in. She's an unwed mother. She's penniless. She has no job. She goes to a charity thinking that she's going to get some kind of help, and she's denied and criticized. Now, this was often what happened at the time, being that there was no social welfare system. Charity work was left in the hands of the wealthy. Okay, so why does Priestley do this? Why does he make this woman who is got this, very good social reputation, but she's doing charity work, cares about her children, so to speak? Well, like I said before, when an inspector calls takes place, there's hardly any social welfare system in place in the UK. Remember, we talked about this in previous lessons. So society is divided into classes. There's a very rigid class structure in place. You had your upper classes at the very top. You had your middle classes, obviously in the middle. That made up maybe 15% of society. People that were reasonably well off, had a good job, not wealthy, but not poor. You had your wealthy class at the top. That might have been anywhere from 2 to 5% of the total population. Everybody else was below that middle class line. That was about 80% of society, your working class and your poor classes. Now, the working class at the bottom, like I said, made up nearly 80%. When people needed assistance, being that there was no social welfare system in place, there was no NHS, there was no housing benefit, they needed to rely on charities. Who ran these charities? People like Mrs. Birling. Okay, people from the wealthier upper classes. Her treatment of Eva Smith is a reflection of what Birling believed, how many of the poor were treated when they approached these charities and asked for help. They were put in the hands of these wealthy, uncaring people and were often denied any assistance. Okay, so Priestley uses Mrs. Birling in her treatment of Eva to demonstrate how inadequate the system was at the time the story takes place. Again, no social welfare system. Everything is, any assistance that's out there is charities. Charities are run by the wealthy. Okay, very little assistance available to those in need. What little there is available under the control of the wealthy. Not all wealthy people were selfish and uncaring, but enough of them were to really not make a big difference in the lives of the people that needed it the most. Now, Priestley goes further in showing her attitude towards Eva is often how the poor classes were treated by the wealthy. Again, Eva is criticized and judged for being an unwed pregnant woman, no job, no future. She casts a moral judgment upon this girl who is less from a lower class than her. She considers herself superior because she's from the upper classes and is a proper English woman. How dare this woman come to us pregnant with no job and expect our help? Okay, so keep in mind, we talked about this in previous lessons as well, that Priestley was a socialist. He was very much against this society, the way society was set up, this top-heavy society where the vast majority of the wealth is controlled by the smallest class. He wanted more wealth distribution, more opportunity for the working class and the poorer classes. He considered the wealthy classes very selfish, very uncaring, didn't care about the poor. They only worked for charities as a front to make themselves feel good, fill up their days, and enhance their reputation. And Mrs. Birling is a reflection of that. She's a very arrogant woman. She seems to be very cold towards her own children, also towards Eva, who's in desperate need of help. She couldn't care less, and denies her help and criticizes her, takes a moral high ground. Now, Mrs. Birling refers to Eva, her attitude towards Eve is very, very evident in the way she speaks to her. Says, a girl like that. Okay. Again, talking about her condition, being that she's pregnant, being that she's unwed. She got herself in this situation. She talks about how it's not their responsibility to help her, even though they're a charity. It's the father of the child. Now, she's completely unaware at this point that that child she's carrying is actually her grandchild. That is her son, Eric, that is the father of the child that she's carrying. Okay, but she's unaware of this and she's blatantly says, it's not our responsibility to help you. Okay, so what is Priestley trying to do? He's using Mrs. Birling to show his sort of disgust with the way society is set up at this time. He's using her to show that it is very little assistance that's available to the poorer classes is completely inadequate. First of all, there's not enough of it. You need a government system to redistribute the wealth and help the poor, not charities, because they're run by people like Mrs. Birling. Arrogant, selfish, look down upon poor people that have less than them and do very little to help them. Okay, so that is a very quick summary of Mrs. Birling and why Priestley, how he uses her character in the way he does. I hope this has been helpful. I hope you are enjoying the series on Inspector Calls. I will post some more lessons. Please do subscribe to my channel. Please do comment and tell me if you have any suggestions about lessons that you would like to see. Please do put them in the comments. I do read them. Good luck, everybody, and I hope to see you in future tutorials.